Colleen Patrick-Goudreau here, joyful vegan, author of The Joyful Vegan, How to Stay Vegan in a World That Wants You to Eat Meat, Dairy, and Eggs. And I've been soliciting your questions about being vegan, living vegan, staying vegan, being a joyful vegan, how to navigate this non-vegan world that we live in. And of course, I've been covering a lot of your questions in my books and in the podcast that I've been doing for 14 years called Food for Thought. So I got an email recently from a young woman. I don't know, I think she's young. I think everybody's younger than me now, named Justine. And Justine told me that Justine's sister has a daughter, so Justine's niece, and it's her third birthday coming up. And Justine's sister is celebrating Justine's niece's birthday at a petting zoo. And so Justine is in this quandary and feels, because she doesn't support zoos, because she doesn't support animals being confined in zoos. Now, this is a petting zoo. I do want to differentiate. I do need to clarify that because I think there is a difference between a zoo where wild animals are kept and a zoo where domesticated animals are kept. I'm not saying I support the petting zoos. I'm just saying I do think we have to look at that nuance because I do think there is a bit of a difference. Whether you agree with that or not, I think there is a difference. And again, I'm not saying that I support the petting zoo, but just to be clear, it's a petting zoo where there are chickens, rabbits, donkeys, I think goats as well. And so it's a petting zoo. You know, we have petting zoos in our local park. I mean, it's typical, right? And so Justine feels that she doesn't want to go to this party, this birthday party celebrating her niece's third birthday, because she doesn't philosophically and ethically support zoos, petting zoos even. And so how does she navigate this? She said her options are: one, she could go and educate the parents and the children all about how bad the petting zoo is, and probably upset some parents. Number two, these are all Justine's words. Number two, she could contact the owners of the petting zoo and ask all sorts of questions, but not really know if she's getting the truthful answers. And number three, she could not go and stand firm in her beliefs, as she phrased it. But as Justine said, what would that do to my relationship with my sister and my niece? Indeed. Very good question. And so I think this is the reason I'm answering this question on the video is because I think we all face these moments when we're trying to live an ethical life, these little kind of gray areas where we feel that we need to stand up for what we believe in, i.e. not exploiting animals. But we also are faced with what this does to our relationships with folks. So I talk about the sensitivity and the delicateness of these relationships that we navigate as vegan, because one of the fears and one of the issues is that our veganness competes with our relationships, so the perception goes, and competes with our different identities, our identities as men, as women, as whether we're Catholic or Jewish or Muslim, or if we're Polish or German or Italian or Irish or Mexican, whatever it is, like all these, the cultural identities, gender identities, all these things. And so and family identity. So here we are in this case of, what do? Do I not go and risk upsetting my sister and my niece and affect that relationship, or how do I do it? So here are my thoughts. So the first thing I think, come here, Michiko. The first thing I think is, number one is, I talk about the power of being the vegan in the room for a reason, because I think we really underestimate how us being in the company of others affects the company of others in a good way, even though it feels like it's negative, because when we walk into the room and we say we're vegan, everyone's like, oh God, here's the vegan, right? And yet what's really happening is that you're showing up in your full consciousness and awareness and compassion, and what's being reflected back to those who are not yet aware, perhaps, or manifesting that awareness of what happens to the animals, especially in the case of animals who are being raised for human consumption. What that does is hold a mirror up to everybody else, and it's not really pleasant to face something you're not doing, even though you do consider yourself a compassionate person, even though I'm sure Justine's sister is a compassionate person. And it sounds like this is the same kind of thing we all experience, is we grow up, having instilled in us a love of animals, and yet we're being fed animals and were being brought to the zoo to admire animals. Now, when I think back at my childhood, the petting zoo was one of the places where I actually did connect with animals. And I look at that not as, gosh, when I was young, my parents brought me to the zoo and, oh, it was awful and the animals were so sad. It really was actually a positive experience for me. Now, I'm not saying that like petting zoos are good, so calm down, everybody, and don't send me emails. That's not what I'm saying. The point is, we have to understand why the people in our lives are doing what they're doing. And obviously, Justine's sister is taking her daughter to a petting zoo because she also believes and perceives that being around animals is a positive thing for her daughter. So when I say that we show up in our compassion, I mean, that's how we have to show up in these circumstances. We have to show up with compassion. Now, I think back at that story I tell in The Joyful Vegan, and I've told it on my podcast about when I was confronted and I willingly put myself in a situation where there were hunters, really shooters during a dove shoot, shooting birds, and I was there to patrol the property line and help any birds that fell, who were shot, and make sure that the shooters didn't shoot over the property line. And what I talk about in that story is that I recognized that there was a lack of compassion in that field that day, and the last thing I wanted to do was bring more lack of compassion. That what I recognized, what I felt my responsibility was, because I couldn't do anything else, was to bring compassion to that place. Now, this is the first thing I thought of when I saw Justine's email is, what role might you play being the face of compassion? And I don't just mean judgment and righteousness. I mean compassion, and bringing that to a space that you feel is lacking it. Now, in terms of what to do once you get there, does that mean you lecture the families and the parents there and the kids there? You're going to have to you have to decide what it looks like for you to model compassion. And I think you might find that that's probably not the thing to do. Lecturing anybody or righteousness, etc., right? Versus risking negatively affecting your relationship with your sister, which ruins any possibility that you would actually be able to reach her on a level that you want to reach her on. And this goes for any of us. I mean, I've had letters from grandparents who said, I'm vegan now and I love my grandkids and I babysit them a lot, and my daughter or son, whatever, wants me to bring the kids to an ice cream store, and my grandkids love going to the ice cream store, and I have limited time with them, and I feel like, gosh, if I don't bring them, and I'm not saying that, like, obviously the relationships are built in ice cream stores, but do you understand, like, there are these little moments of what are you trying to achieve? Like, what's your goal? What's your aim? What is your intention, right? Is your intention to be right, or is your intention to be effective? And that's why I always come back to that question, do I want to be right, or do I want to be effective? And so that's how I feel. I know it's not a straight answer, like go or don't go, but it's not whether it's a petting zoo or an ice cream store. Like, that doesn't matter. The point is, in a situation where you feel you would be compromising your values by going, I guess I would say, are you really, or are you seeing it as an opportunity to bring compassion to a place that you might be able to benefit? Now, that doesn't just mean making your point at the zoo itself, right, or talking to the owner. And I still encourage you to call the owner. I mean, absolutely call the owner and find out, like, what happens to the animals when they're no longer their cute little babies, and where do they go afterwards, and do you take care of the chickens their whole lives, and is there a way I can help maybe, facilitate the animals going to a sanctuary after when they're older? I don't know. I mean, certainly have a conversation with the owner still. Certainly have a conversation with your sister still. Certainly have a conversation with your niece as well. But I think there are other things you can do as well. And, again, like, conversation and communication, I think, is really key. But to me, that's ultimately what we have to ask ourselves. It's like, what are we trying to accomplish? And if you not being there, is that going to be better than you being there? Right. And also I told a story on my podcast recently when we were up in Vancouver Island. I heard about a place where there tends to be a lot of bear sightings. And when I heard that it was actually a salmon hatchery, I thought, oh God, that doesn't sound right. I don't want to go contribute to what I believe is exploitation, of salmon. I mean, a hatchery whereby they're hatched to be killed, which is pretty much animal agriculture in a nutshell. We bring animals into this world only to kill them. So I thought, oh gosh, I don't want to support that. But I felt that by going and bearing witness to it, I was also able to judge with my own eyes what's happening here. And in the end, I felt like, okay, because I also was worried that like they were inviting people to come and see the bears in a way that was exploiting the bears also, like luring them in with the salmon and then, letting people take pictures and, kind of oogle all over them. In the end, I didn't find that at all. You can listen to the podcast episode. I actually was glad to see it with my own eyes. And the thing is, I never paid for it. There was no charge. Like we didn't have to pay to we did see a bear, which was amazing. And nobody was luring the bear. So I felt pretty good about that. But also I didn't pay. And so in this case with Justine, there's some of that too, right? Like you're not actually paying to go to the zoo. If your sister's inviting you, you could use it as an opportunity to see for yourself what the situation is like. And then you are better able to go to your sister afterwards and say, did you see what I saw? I the enclosures looked small and I worried about that one chicken. He didn't look very happy. Or, gosh, as things go, that wasn't so bad. And yet it really made me uncomfortable to see the animals, in that circumstances. And gosh, when I think about animal agriculture, blah, 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 blah. You're better able to have a conversation because you've been there, you've borne witness, and you've done it from a place of authority rather than from a place of distant judgment. Does that make sense? I don't know if that helps at all, but those are kind of my thoughts. And that's why I did not respond to Justine in an email, because it took me a long time to say all that. But I hope that helps, and I hope that is just some food for thought for you to carry along on your day as you face these different gray areas. And there are gray areas. Any vegan who says there are no gray areas, just stop following them, because life is not black and white. And we can do so much to not contribute to animal exploitation and violence. We have so many opportunities to do that. But there are some areas in our lives when we have to say, what is the greater good here? And how am I better able to help and be a voice for animals? And those are the questions we have to ask ourselves, and we're the only ones who can answer them. So I hope that just gives you some food for thought. And if you have any other questions, of course, you can always find me on social media, mostly on Instagram at Joyful Vegan. Also, my joyfulvegan.com is the website mostly for the new book, but you can link to my main website after that. If you just search for Colleen Patrick-Goudreau, you'll find me, ColleenPatrick-Goudreau.com. So for the animals, this is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thank you for asking your question and for trusting me. And thank you for watching.